The story begins with a moment of intense tension. The narrator stands quietly behind, overhearing Jessica's conversation with her mom on a FaceTime call. A line like, "Don't worry, Mom, I'm just having fun. I'd never actually marry a mechanic," marks the beginning. Upon hearing those words, the protagonist could hardly believe what he had just heard. He stood there, frozen, unable to process the reality of what Jessica had said about him. It was not a burst of anger that followed, but a strange clarity, a moment when everything seemed to fall into place. The words she spoke, though they stung, didn't trigger an outburst. Instead, they illuminated the true nature of their relationship. He didn't feel rage. He didn't feel the need to argue. It was as though he had been handed the final piece to a puzzle he had been trying to solve for so long. Now, he could see the whole picture, and it wasn't what he had imagined. He didn't react immediately. Instead, he felt a quiet understanding wash over him. He didn't need to ask why. It was clear now. The reality of her feelings, the judgment of his work, and the disregard for his passion were all laid bare. He could hear her words echoing in his mind, and though they hurt, they weren't a surprise. They were an inevitable consequence of something that had been building up quietly in the background of their relationship. Without a word, without a single protest, he made his decision. He didn't need to confront her, to engage in an argument that would only drag things out. He didn't need to explain his feelings, because they had already been explained for him. He quietly gathered his things, each movement slow but purposeful. The action wasn't rushed, nor was it dramatic. It was calm, controlled, like he had made peace with the situation even before he knew he had. He didn't say goodbye, didn't leave a note, and didn't offer any explanation. There was nothing to say. It wasn't about making a scene, it wasn't about making her feel guilty, it was simply about moving on. He walked out the door, leaving behind everything that no longer served him, without looking back. Jessica reached out. She called him, asking to meet. She said they needed to talk. But this time, things were different. The conversation was no longer about small misunderstandings or avoiding difficult truths. Now, it was time to face the reality that had been hidden behind polite smiles and awkward silences for so long. He agreed to meet her, knowing that the time for avoiding the issue was over. When they sat down, the air was thick with tension. He didn't need small talk or pleasantries. He looked at her, straight in the eyes, and asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the moment he overheard the conversation. "Do you really think that about me?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying an edge of hurt that he couldn't entirely hide. "Why would you say that in front of your mom?" Jessica flinched slightly. She opened her mouth, then closed it, unsure of how to start. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "It wasn't like that," she began. "It was just something I said in the moment. I didn't mean it." He didn't interrupt, but he could feel his patience thinning. "You didn't mean it," he repeated, almost coldly. "You just casually tell your mom that you'd never marry a mechanic? That I'm just a temporary thing?" Jessica's face flushed. She looked away for a moment before meeting his gaze again. "It wasn't true," she insisted, her voice more forceful now. "It was just a lie. I was trying to make her feel better. I didn't want her to worry." But those words, those exact words, had already been spoken, and they couldn't be taken back. He had heard them with his own ears, and in that moment, they revealed more than she realized. It wasn't just a lie. It was a truth she had spoken without even thinking about it. Her words reflected how she truly saw him and his work, and it was more than just a casual comment. It showed how little she respected the very thing that mattered most to him. "Don't you think that saying something like that shows more than just a moment of weakness?" he asked, his voice now sharper. "You said that because, deep down, you feel that way. You think less of me because I'm not what your family wants or what you've always imagined." Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. She had no defense for this. She could tell him it was a mistake, that it was a slip of the tongue, but the damage had already been done. She couldn't undo the truth that had been revealed. He paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch between them. He wasn't going to let her off the hook with a simple excuse. She needed to understand the weight of her words. "I don't need you to explain it away," he said quietly. "What I need is for you to own it. You said it. You meant it. And now I see exactly where I stand in your life. You don't value me, not really. You don't respect what I do. And that's not something I can just ignore." Her face fell, and for the first time in their conversation, she looked genuinely lost. She had hoped she could talk her way out of it, but she realized now that he wasn't buying her excuses. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I was just trying to protect myself from everything. I was scared of how different our lives are. How different I am from you." The tension in the room was palpable. He looked at her, feeling nothing but the overwhelming clarity of the situation. There was no more pretending, no more hope for things to turn around. "You don't get it," he said, his voice steady but firm. "You don't get to say things like that and then expect everything to go back to normal. You made your feelings clear, Jessica. And now, I'm making mine clear too." She opened her mouth to speak, but he held up his hand. "I don't want to hear it anymore," he said, cutting her off. "The truth is, you've already said it all." Jessica didn't give up easily. After their difficult conversation, she immediately tried to fix things. She sent texts, apologized repeatedly, and called to explain that she had been wrong. She told him she loved him and couldn't bear the thought of losing him. Her words, though sincere in tone, were empty to him now. The damage had already been done. She didn't stop there. She tried to backpedal further, proposing marriage in an attempt to prove her commitment. But the more she tried, the more obvious it became that her actions were merely attempts to patch up a wound that had been inflicted by her own words. She offered solutions, made promises, and talked about their future together, but none of it felt real. Her words seemed forced, as though she were trying to undo a truth that could not be taken back. The protagonist, however, wasn't moved by her sudden attempts to mend things. He didn't rush to forgive her, nor did he give her false hope. His response was simple, to the point, and unwavering. "I don't need words right now," he said. "I just need to know what you really think." He wasn't interested in her apologies or her promises. All he needed was to hear the truth that she had already shown him, even if she wasn't fully ready to admit it. She had made her feelings clear, and no amount of apologies could erase the weight of what had been said. As Jessica's attempts to reconcile with him grew more desperate, both of their families became involved. The calls from Jessica's family started pouring in, each one trying to pressure him into giving her another chance. Her mother, in particular, was relentless, trying to make him understand that Jessica had made a mistake, that she was under a lot of pressure, and that he should reconsider his decision. But these calls only added to the tension. They forced him to face a situation he didn't want to deal with. He wasn't just breaking up with Jessica, he was also dealing with the fallout from both families, each trying to influence him in their own way. The protagonist, however, remained steadfast. He didn't let the pressure from either side sway him. He knew that this wasn't about making peace with anyone other than himself. He had been disrespected in a way that he couldn't simply overlook, no matter how many apologies came his way. His decision was clear: he would not be swayed by guilt or family dynamics. The protagonist made the decision to officially end the relationship. There were no more chances to fix things, no more room for compromise. It wasn't about holding on to something that wasn't meant to be anymore. He understood that it was time to move on, and that meant stepping away from a situation that no longer honored his worth. He turned his focus back to what he loved, his work. The projects he had been putting off now took center stage, and he poured himself into the restoration of classic motorcycles, finding solace in the craft he had always loved. His work began to flourish again. New projects came in, and with them, a sense of purpose that had been absent during the uncertainty of his relationship. It wasn't just about the money or the recognition, it was about the pure joy of working with his hands, restoring something that had its own story and history. It felt like he had rediscovered himself, like he had reclaimed a part of his soul that had been lost in trying to please someone who couldn't appreciate him. Soon enough, he met someone new. This person didn't look at him with judgment or try to change him. She appreciated his work, his passion, and his dedication to the craft. It was refreshing, comforting, and most importantly, it was real. There were no pretenses. The connection felt effortless, and for the first time in a long while, he realized that he didn't have to settle. He didn't need to be someone else's placeholder, he just needed to be himself. After the breakup, he came to a profound realization about himself. Self-respect and mutual respect were the foundations of any relationship. He understood now that it wasn't worth compromising his values for anyone, especially someone who didn't see his worth. He needed to surround himself with people who genuinely valued him, not just for what he could do for them, but for who he was. If you have ever found yourself in a similar situation, or if you have strong opinions about self-worth and relationships, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your experiences and hear how you've navigated moments where your values were tested. Self-respect is something we all need to uphold, and it's important to know when to stand up for yourself. If you agree that maintaining your dignity is one of the most essential parts of any relationship, please give this video a like. Your support helps us continue to create more meaningful content, and we appreciate it. Also, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on more stories like this one and join a community of people who value self-respect, growth, and real connections. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to hearing from you.